let us consider the operational observation. An object of exceptional visual brilliance is currently being registered on the screen of our instrumental complex. This cosmic body is classified as Comet C-2024 S1 Atlas. Its tail structure, illuminated by the rising or setting sun, appears as a minimalist, almost spectral streak across the cosmic velvet. This optical phenomenon warrants the highest aesthetic praise. However, a critical analysis is required. What if this external appeal is merely a facade, concealing a lethal, non-obvious threat? What if the longest and brightest plume we are registering is, in reality, a chemical exhaust stretched over millions of miles? And the most critical factor, our planet is crossing its zone of propagation. The objective of this investigation is to conduct an expert analysis addressing the deep-seated, evolutionarily ingrained human fear, the fear of intoxication, the dread of an invisible agent arriving from an external environment. In the information space immediately following the discovery of Comet Atlas, a surge of public alarm was recorded. Headlines rendered in bold font, broadcast warnings, Earth to plunge into cyanide cloud, Atlas delivering extraterrestrial pathogens. These narratives are not merely products of media speculation. They represent a direct correlation with a historical precedent that occurred over a century ago, now being replicated with renewed intensity, but under a new designation, Atlas. The genesis of this anxiety dates back to 1910, during the return of the famous Halley's Comet. The global scientific community, armed with nascent spectral analyzers, for the first time gained the capability to verify the chemical composition of its tail in detail. The French astronomer Camille Flammarion issued a statement that caused a global outcry. He confirmed that the comet's tail structure contained cyanogen. We must isolate this term, cyanogen. This is a gaseous substance that, upon interaction with water, transforms into hydrocyanic acid, one of the fastest-acting and most highly toxic poisons on the planet. Flammarion, a figure of undisputed scientific authority, could not minimize the significance of this information. His statements, instantaneously broadcast by the press worldwide, were perceived as a verdict. Earth would pass through Halley's tail, and all biological existence on the planet would be extinguished due to poisoning. The societal reaction on the threshold of the 20th century was characterized as hysterical and tragicomic. A wave of panic began across Europe and America, which today qualifies as the plot of a low-budget cinematic production. The population actively acquired anti-comet pills, falsified pharmaceutical means that allegedly provided protection against the gas. Commercial entities exploited the situation, selling ordinary chalk wrapped in foil for extraordinary sums. Citizens sealed their windows and door frames, attempting to ensure the hermetic isolation of their residences. Some individuals used moist cloth materials to plug crevices, seeking to counteract the invisible threat. This was a demonstration of the triumph of irrational anxiety over the principles of rationality. All these protective measures and medications were completely non-functional, yet they created an illusion of situational control. And this anxiety, which seemingly remained confined to 1910, has been reincarnated in the 21st century, utilizing Comet Atlas as a trigger. When astronomical services informed the public that the tail of Comet C-2024 S1 had stretched for tens of millions of miles, this information proved sufficient. Cyanogen, water compounds, methane, all these components were present in the Atlas plume. The internet community immediately recalled the history of Halley and constructed a new, more sophisticated myth. The discussion now concerns more than just cyanide. Information is now circulating that the Atlas tail carries not a chemical, but a biological toxin. Adherents of the panspermia theory, which postulates that the elements of life may have been brought to Earth from outer space, have reframed this hypothesis in the context of catastrophic scenarios. They assert that within the icy nucleus of Atlas, preserved in absolute cold for billions of years, lurk spores and viral agents against which the human immune system possesses no defense. What if the planet Earth, passing through the Atlas plume, is subjected to a biological influence that will provoke a new, unidentified pandemic, significantly more threatening than all known viruses? These cosmic microorganisms are the ideal adversary. They are invisible, they originate from a vacuum, and they are impossible to predict. The name Atlas, which already holds the reputation of a doomed comet undergoing fragmentation, fits perfectly into this narrative. It is not merely disintegrating, it is deliberately dispersing its lethal cargo. We accept the terms of this hypothetical threat and turn to the laws of physics. We will conduct a confrontation between panic and empirical data, using the metrics of density as the primary evidence. Yes, spectral analysis confirms the presence of cyanogen molecules in the tail of Comet Atlas, but we are obligated to pose the key analytical question: at what specific concentration? To realize the scale of this error, one must understand what a cometary tail represents. It is not a dense aerosol cloud. It is the purest, most extreme vacuum imaginable. Our atmosphere, our protective dome, contains 30 quintillion molecules per cubic centimeter at sea level. In the densest zone of the Comet Atlas tail, the concentration of substance is only about 1,000 molecules per cubic centimeter. For clarity, the deepest vacuum we can create in a terrestrial laboratory is thousands of times denser than the comet's tail. When Earth traverses the Atlas tail, and this occurs if the orbits coincide, we are not entering an intoxication zone. We are merely contacting molecules that are physically separated by distances of hundreds of yards. Our atmospheric barrier, this dense layer of air, is millions of times denser than the plume. Cyanogen molecules colliding with the oxygen and nitrogen molecules of our atmosphere at speeds of tens of kilometers per second do not penetrate inward. They are subjected to instantaneous dissociative destruction. They break down into non-toxic atoms under the influence of kinetic impact and ultraviolet radiation. This is comparable to a single mosquito flying at the speed of a supersonic jet and crashing into a steel plate. It does not penetrate it. It instantly vanishes, leaving no material trace. It is for this reason that Earth passed through the tail of Halley's Comet in 1910, and not a single biological organism suffered from cyanide. The only casualty of that panic was the principle of rationality. Today, when we discuss Comet Atlas, we are observing a recurrence of this drama, but in digital format. The fear of cosmic cyanide is, in essence, the fear of our own level of non-information. Within the framework of this study, we will delve deeper into the analysis. We will not only refute the concept of a chemical threat, but also conduct a breakdown of the dual tail phenomenon of Comet Atlas, each part of which consists of different chemical elements and operates according to its own strictly verified scientific principles. We will determine why our anxiety about an invisible toxin is significantly more dangerous than the toxin itself. And we will provide a final answer to the question of why, despite all scientific confirmations of safety, people continue to invest in protective gear that will never be necessary, and believe that the most spectacular object in the sky is, in fact, our most serious antagonist. To argue why the cometary plume is not a lethal chemical vector, but rather a cosmic illusion, we must conduct a detailed structural analysis of this phenomenon. We proceed to the next investigative phase of our analysis, where anxiety regarding cyanogen is nullified by the laws of gas diffusion and density. Astronomical optics, unlike panicked news feeds, does not record a single plume. It registers two, and each operates according to its own strictly verified scientific principles that we must detail. It should be established that the Atlas comet plume, which we observed, is not a monolithic structure, but represents a complex dynamic system. These are two fundamentally different objects, formed by two distinct forces of the Sun. The first and most massive plume is the dust tail. It contains microscopic particles, silicate dust, organic fragments, carbon granules. These elements are liberated from the cometary nucleus in the process of sublimation, the phase transition of ice into a gaseous state. Two forces act upon the dust. The first is the gravitational influence of the Sun, which attempts to draw it toward the star. The second, more paradoxical, is the pressure of solar light, or photons. These photons, while massless, possess momentum and push the particles away from the star. Since these forces do not impact the dust perfectly symmetrically and the particles possess differing masses, the dust tail always exhibits a characteristic arc shape. It lags behind the comet's trajectory, visually resembling a ship's wake, and is the primary source of visible brightness to the naked eye, functioning as a gigantic reflector. The second, significantly more complex and less noticeable plume is the ion, or plasma tail. This is the root cause of all anxieties. It consists of ionized molecules, those same volatile gases including cyanogen that were released from the nucleus. They become ionized under the influence of high-energy ultraviolet and X-ray radiation from the sun, transforming into plasma. These charged particles are not affected by light pressure, but by the sun's magnetic field, which is carried by the solar wind. Magnetic field lines capture these ions and transport them strictly radially away from the star. Consequently, the ion tail appears straight, like a laser beam, and is always oriented directly away from the sun, regardless of the comet's current direction of motion. It is in this bluish glow that spectral analysis discovered the aforementioned lethal cyanogen. Now that we have identified the localization of the potential toxin, let us analyze its concentration, which is the cornerstone of this panic. The anxiety regarding cyanogen that swept the public in 1910 was based on a factually correct but absolutely incomplete scientific finding. The comet's tail contains a lethal poison. To comprehend the absurdity of mass panic, we must refer to quantitative indicators. Let us conduct a thought experiment, which we designate as the theorem of rarefaction. The comet's tail is not a dense gaseous mixture or smoke. It is the most extreme vacuum that can be conceived of in our solar system. Imagine a volume of 1 cubic kilometer. In Earth's atmosphere at sea level, this volume contains 30 quintillion, that is 30 followed by 18 zeros, molecules. This is a colossal dense mass. In the densest area of the comet Atlas plume, in its gaseous stream, the substance concentration is, at best, 1,000 molecules per cubic centimeter, and this is the total concentration of all gaseous components. The concentration of cyanogen in this volume is only a fraction of a percent. When Earth traverses such a plume, it is not entering a chemical attack. It is merely contacting molecules that are physically separated by distances of hundreds of yards. Our atmospheric barrier, this dense layer of air hundreds of kilometers thick, is millions of times denser than the cometary tail. Cyanogen molecules colliding with nitrogen and oxygen molecules of our atmosphere at speeds of tens of kilometers per second do not penetrate inward. They are subjected to instantaneous dissociative impact. Molecular bonds are ruptured. Cyanogen, which is non-toxic in its bound state, decomposes into harmless carbon and nitrogen atoms that immediately dissolve in the air, leaving no smell and no harm. Our atmospheric filter worked flawlessly in 1910, and it will work similarly today. No threat of intoxication to the Earth's population has ever existed. The myth of cyanogen proved resilient due to a single factor, the disregard for scale. In 1910, when scientists announced cyanogen, most people lacked an understanding of atmospheric density and the principles of diffusion. It was easier for them to imagine a reservoir of poison than a rarefied cloud where molecules are lost in space. Journalists focused on the word poison and not on the numerical data, which were too technical and complex. Anxiety brought substantial financial profit, whereas science elicited only a skeptical shrug. Now let us proceed to the modern phase of this paranoia, the panspermia hypothesis, or cosmic viruses. This fear has a deeper, almost philosophical foundation. Panspermia is a substantiated scientific hypothesis that life, or its basic elements, could have been transported to Earth from outer space. And indeed, spectral analysis of comets, including data collected by space missions, confirms that comets are true cosmic containers carrying organic compounds. Complex organic molecules, including alcohols, aldehydes, and amino acids, which are the fundamental building blocks of protein and the basis of life, have been found in cometary tails. This brings us to the key scientific discovery. The Atlas comet tail is not only a toxin that is absent, but also a source of life that does not cause us fear. However, can a comet transport a killer virus? Here we once again invoke our atmospheric shield. To survive and begin replication on Earth, a cosmic spore or virus must overcome two lethal barriers. The first is cosmic radiation. In open space, under the influence of harsh ultraviolet and X-ray radiation from the sun, the DNA of any virus or spore is destroyed within hours or days. Only spores deeply encapsulated within the nucleus can survive. The second barrier is the thermal shock upon atmospheric entry. No known virus is capable of surviving temperatures of thousands of degrees that arise during hypersonic entry. Passing through the rarefied tail of Comet Atlas carries no biological threat. The plume is not a biological weapon. It is a museum exhibit whose contents have already been sterilized. In summary, our analysis confirmed that the fear of the killer plume is a historical phobia that repeats with every new cosmic object. We fear cyanide, whose concentration is too low to cause harm, and viruses that will not survive our atmospheric shield. Our atmosphere is our ideal, reliable protective mechanism formed by nature itself. And every time comets Atlas or Halley cross Earth's orbit, they merely confirm we are safe. We do not need anti-comet pills. We require critical analysis and knowledge of high school physics. We are prepared for the culmination, where we will see how panic transformed an ordinary cosmic event into a tragicomic farce. Our investigation proceeds to the decisive stage. We have gathered evidence confirming the insignificantly low density of the cometary tail. It is time to analyze how these irrefutable facts collided with the mass hysteria that, like an infectious agent, swept the world. We enter the courtroom, where the accused is the lethal cyanogen, and the jury consists of millions of terrified people who lived in 1910, whose panic is fully reproduced today in information streams mentioning Comet Atlas. This was the moment of peak anxiety, provoked by a single word: poison. The key event that became fundamental to all subsequent cosmic phobias, including those associated with our Comet Atlas, occurred on May 18, 1910. On this very day, planet Earth, according to precise calculations, was supposed to cross the tail of the famous Halley's Comet. Society anticipated either a miraculous salvation or total catastrophe. Newspapers in New York, London, and Paris were published with headlines that seem absurd today, but then sounded like a death sentence, causing people to flee cities in terror. Earth headed for toxic gas. Humanity's final hour. What did journalists rely on to create this wave of horror? They cited the authority of science, but quoted it distortedly and out of context. Yes, the French astronomer Dr. Flammarion confirmed the presence of cyanogen, but he also attempted to explain that the gas concentration was negligible. However, his rational arguments were drowned out by the general chorus of panic. Belief in the inevitable end of the world was fueled not only by headlines but also by the active, cynical sale of protective equipment. Enterprising dealers sold anti-comet umbrellas, cometines, and bottles of oxygen. Most often, these were just containers of ordinary air or pills made of chalk and sugar, sold at the price of gold. This was the first prominent historical example where fear of a cosmic threat was monetized into a multi-million-dollar business. At the very beginning of the 20th century, people lacked sufficient knowledge of atmospheric physics. They could not comprehend the scale of the vacuum. It seemed to them that the comet's tail was a thick, dense smog that would settle on cities like a fog and cause suffocation. It is much easier to imagine a reservoir of poison than a rarefied cloud, where molecules are separated by distances of hundreds of yards. People barricaded themselves in their homes, hiding under wet cloths, wearing gas masks, or on rooftops, awaiting the apocalypse. And so came the night of May 17th to 18th. Millions of people were awake. And what was happening in the atmosphere at that time? Nothing. Earth, moving at a speed of about 30 kilometers per second, slammed into Halley's tail. The cyanogen molecules flying toward it collided with our atmosphere, which is a super dense, impenetrable shield for them. At speeds of tens of kilometers per second, these molecules underwent instantaneous dissociative impact. Molecular bonds were ruptured. Cyanogen, which is non-toxic, decomposed into carbon and nitrogen atoms that immediately dissolved in the air, leaving neither smell nor harm. Our atmospheric filter worked flawlessly. The climax the entire world was waiting for became an absolute anticlimax. This was the most boring end of the world in history. On the morning of May 19th, people woke up. The sun had risen, birds were singing, and everyone was still alive. Newspapers that had screamed about death yesterday today printed shame-faced headlines about miraculous salvation and divine intervention. The scientific explanation about density and vacuum was too complex to compete with the religious, miraculous salvation. This was not a triumph of science, but it was the most convincing evidence of Earth's safety. This tragicomic episode is the key to understanding the fears associated with Comet Atlas, the anxieties about cyanogen, about biological contamination. This is a direct, unbreakable link to the panic of 1910. We are genetically inclined to fear the invisible, and every new cosmic body containing cyanogen becomes a relapse of this psychological trauma for us. But there is another modern scientific aspect that we must consider to finally debunk the myth of the killer plume. This is the question of what else comets carry besides cyanogen. Spectral analysis of modern comets, including our Atlas, shows that their tails contain significantly more of interest than poison. For example, water, or more accurately, hydroxyl, a decomposition product of water ice, carbon monoxide, ammonia, methane, and most importantly, complex organics. Amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, the basis of life, have been found in cometary plumes. This brings us to the main scientific twist that turns our analysis on its head. The comet's tail is not poison. The comet's tail is perhaps evidence of our own origin. Comets, scattering their organic compounds in space, may have seeded Earth with chemical elements. Thus, what we fear may be our genetic ancestor, but here arises a subtle scientific question. If a comet carries organic compounds, can it transport a biological weapon? Here we once again invoke our atmospheric shield. To survive and begin replication on Earth, a cosmic spore or virus must overcome two lethal barriers. The first is cosmic radiation. The DNA of any virus in open space, under the influence of ultraviolet and X-rays, is destroyed within hours or days. The second barrier is the thermal shock upon atmospheric entry. No known virus or bacterium is capable of surviving temperatures of thousands of degrees that arise during hypersonic entry. Passing through the rarefied tail of Comet Atlas carries no biological threat. The plume is not a biological weapon. It is a museum exhibit whose contents have already been sterilized by cosmic radiation. In conclusion, our analysis has demonstrated that the fear of the killer plume is a historical phobia that repeats with every new comet. We fear cyanide, whose concentration is too low to cause harm, and viruses that will not survive our atmospheric shield. Our atmosphere is our ideal, reliable protective mechanism formed by nature itself. And every time comets Atlas or Halley cross Earth's orbit, they merely confirm we are safe. We do not need anti-comet pills. We need critical thinking and knowledge of high school physics. In the final section of our report, we will move beyond this historical and chemical reflection. We will summarize: what should we do about the anxiety that is so easily monetized in the information space? How can we protect our cognitive apparatus from cosmic disinformation? And why, despite all the evidence, will we continue to expect from comets not only aesthetic pleasure, but also fatal consequences? We will find the answers in the sociology of the masses. The first and most important conclusion concerns our psychology of risk. We, as a species, are evolutionarily hardwired to fear what moves quickly, unexpectedly, and brightly. The comet perfectly fits this archetype of threat. It comes from the darkness. It has a tail, like a mythical antagonist, and it carries poison, which we ourselves identified in it. It is much easier to fear cyanogen that is millions of miles away than the real threat that surrounds us every day. For example, air pollution in a major city. The concentration of carbon monoxide or sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere over a metropolis during rush hour exceeds the concentration of cyanogen in the densest part of a comet's tail by tens of thousands of times. But we do not buy gas masks to go to work. We acquire them to defend against a phantom danger. This is the so-called threat inflation. If in 1910 we were intimidated by one toxin, today, in the 21st century, the myth has mutated. Now we are being frightened by invisible cosmic viruses and bacteria. Why? Because the recent pandemic taught us to fear a biological threat more than a chemical one. Conspiracy theorists simply take our collective trauma and project it onto space. They assert, yes, you survived an earthly virus, but you won't survive an alien one. This fear cannot be treated with scientific facts because it fulfills a social function. It distracts us from more complex man-made problems. From the climate crisis, from ocean pollution, from the inefficiency of healthcare systems, it is much easier to fight a comet than one's own way of life. The second conclusion concerns the true value of our atmosphere. Our analysis demonstrated that our main protector is not space agencies, not the Atlas system, and not nuclear missiles. Our primary protector is the density of air. Earth's atmosphere is not just a mixture of gases. It is an ideal, multi-layered, constantly active defense barrier. It shields us from ultraviolet radiation, it incinerates small meteorites, and, as we have established, it instantly neutralizes any chemical agent arriving from a vacuum. We must treat our atmosphere as an invaluable, one-of-a-kind protective apparatus that cannot be replaced. It is the thin layer that makes our entire civilization possible. In this context, Comet Atlas itself and its plume present us with a striking philosophical lesson. The comet's tail, which we perceived as poison, may in fact be the cradle of life. If the panspermia theory is correct, then the amino acids and complex organic molecules we detect in the comet's plume are evidence that life in space is not a unique phenomenon. Comets are not couriers of death. They are cosmic distributors of life that have seeded Earth with chemical elements. Every time Earth passes through a cometary plume, it is possibly receiving a tiny new portion of building materials. We fear what could kill us, but ignore what gave us life. The final conclusion is one of perspective. We recognize that the fear of comets will not disappear. Even now, as we discuss Comet Atlas, new yet-to-be-discovered objects are moving in the Oort cloud. Sooner or later, astronomers will discover a new comet that will also likely have cyanogen in its tail, and the internet will explode with sensational headlines again. This is inevitable. What can we do? The only effective bunker against informational threats is critical thinking. Next time you see the word poison in a headline, ask yourself, at what concentration? Next time you are told that a virus arrived from space, remember the radiation belt and the thermal shock upon atmospheric entry. Science provides us not only with answers but with a weapon against fear. And this weapon is knowledge of the laws of vacuum, diffusion, and physics. We must value not only the visual splendor of the comet's tail, but also its safety. This is the most important truth taught to us by both Halley's Comet and its modern sister, Atlas. We are safe. We do not need gas masks. We require only one thing: to stop fearing imagined threats and to focus on the real ones that demand scientific and political resolution. With this, we conclude our analysis. We have proven the threat was false, but the lesson we have gained is invaluable. Observe the sky. There is no toxin there, only aesthetics and infinite material for new scientific research. Until next time, on the frequency of rationality.